talk and then hear yourself. Like the feedback, like, I don't know. So weird and annoying. Hopefully people get back in here and watch me start this over again, but embarrassing, annoying. I'm going to reread this poem and then just move on because it looks like today is just going to be like this today. This poem is called Woman Watches Ocean on a Reef Through a Glass Bottom Boat by Angela Jackson. In the ocean, one fish swallows the other, a geometric progression of loss. You are bigger than I. The calamity of love swelling out larger than us, and what destiny partakes of our dilemma? Swallows the cause and effect, eyes and kissing mouths, and in large parts wanting to breathe and wanting. There is no gentle sense to this, is there? Only a kind of terror at the chain of events, the scale of loss, the ordered destruction, one against the other, all that something larger awaits its moment. Amazing. Thank you for coming back, Andrew. So much going on. Like, first of all, to be able to see fish like on a glass bottom boat, like the water has to be clear and the reef, I can imagine like how beautiful that must be. And then to see one fish eat another fish, and then compare that to love or being in love and knowing that, like, or I feel like the point of the poem is like knowing, or maybe not being in love, I don't know. Swallows the cause and effect, eyes and kissing mouths in large parts wanting to breathe and wanting. There's no gentle sense to this, is there? Only a kind of terror at the chain of events, the scale of loss, the ordered destruction, one against the other, all that something larger awaits its moment. Does that, I guess I suppose at times maybe being in love or relationships, especially if you maybe this is some kind of a projection a projection of mine, but maybe there is a sense of like impending doom tied up in it. What do you think? Exciting, but also absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty good. There's a potential to be hurt. There's not even talking about love or any relationship, absolutely any relationship, and not just relationships, but doing anything in the world. There's this potential to be hurt, right? And I read a quote yesterday talking about I'll butcher it too much, but like basically like captain of a ship doesn't keep their the measure of a great captain is not how well they keep their ship, how long or they keep their ship in port. Basically, like the ships are meant to be sailed, right? Safely in port or something. I knew I would butcher it. Like, yeah, the point of being a captain is to protect your ship, but the point of a ship is to sail the ocean. I'm rambling now, not making too much sense. But we're gonna read this. We're gonna read this book after a rocky start. In an absence, did you miss me? Who's in here? Besides Andrew, did you miss me? That's all I care about. The sun. We've come to the sun. So much drama the last time I was on here and we read. Kamala died in Siddhartha's arms. And now Siddhartha's son finds himself at the hut, and with Siddhartha and the ferryman. Do we know the ferryman's name? I feel like they told us. I don't remember. Vasudeva. Vasudeva. That's his name. There'll be a quiz on this later. Kidding. I'm going to read this, and Friday, if all goes well and Haps is cooperating, I'll get on and we will read the final 2 chapters of this book, and we'll start a new book fresh on Monday. Won't that be fun? So if you're still here, I'm gonna start reading. Oh, this app is awkward sometimes. The sun, or the app isn't, I am with the app. Frightened and weeping, the boy had attended his mother's burial. Frightened and gloomy, he had listened to Siddhartha greeting him as his son and making him welcome in Vasudeva's hut. For days on end, he sat with a pale face on the hill of the dead, looked away, locked his heart, fought and strove against his fate. Siddhartha treated him with consideration and left him alone, for he respected his grief. Siddhartha understood that his son did not know him, that he could not love him as a father. Slowly, he also saw and realized that the 11-year-old child was a spoilt mother's boy and had been brought up in the habits of the rich, that he was accustomed to fine food and a soft bed, accustomed to commanding servants. Siddhartha understood that the spoilt and grieving boy could not suddenly be content in a strange and poor place. He did not press him. He did a great deal for him and always saved the best morsels for him. Slowly, by friendly patience, he hoped to win him over. He had considered himself rich and happy when the boy had come to him, but as time passed, the boy remained unfriendly and sulky. When he proved arrogant and defiant, when he would do no work, when he showed no respect to the old people and robbed Vasudeva's fruit trees, Siddhartha began to realize that no happiness and peace had come to him with his son, only sorrow and trouble. But he loved him and preferred the sorrow and trouble of his love rather than happiness and pleasure without the boy. Since young Siddhartha was in the hut, the old men had shared the work. Vasudeva had taken over all the work at the ferry, and Siddhartha, in order to be with his son, the work in the hut and the field. Vasudeva had taken over all the work at the ferry, and Siddhartha, in order to be with his son, the work in the hut and the fields. For many months, Siddhartha waited patiently in the hope that his son would come to understand him, that he would accept his love and he would perhaps return it. For many months, Vasudeva observed this, waited and was silent. One day, when young Siddhartha was distressing his father with his defiance and temper and had broken both rice bowls, Vasudeva took his friend aside in the evening and talked to him. He broke both rice bowls? How are they going to eat now? Forgive me, he said. I am speaking to you as my friend. I can see that you're worried and unhappy. Your son, my dear friend, is troubling you, and also me. The young bird is accustomed to a different life, to a different nest. He did not run away from riches, and the town with a feeling of nausea and disgust as you did. He had to leave all these things against his will. I have asked the river, my friend. I have asked it many times, and the river laughed. It laughed at me and laughed at you. It shook itself with laughter at our folly. Water will go to water, youth to youth. Your son will not be happy in this place. You ask the river and listen to what it says. You ask the river, Siddhartha. Troubled, Siddhartha looked at the kind face in which there were many good-natured wrinkles. How can I part from him? He said softly. Give me time yet, my dear friend. I'm fighting for him. I'm trying to reach his heart. I will win him with love and patience. The river will also talk to him some day. He is also called. Vasudeva's smile became warmer. Oh, yes, he said. He is also called, and he also belongs to the everlasting life. But do you and I know to what he is called, to which path, which deeds, which sorrows? His sorrows will not be slight. His heart is proud and hard. He will probably suffer much, make many mistakes, do much injustice, and commit many sins. Tell me, my friend, are you educating your son? Is he obedient to you? Do you strike him or punish him? No, Vasudeva, I do not do any of these things. I knew it. You're not strict with him. You do not punish him. You do not command him, because you know that gentleness is stronger than severity, that water is stronger than rock, that love is stronger than force. Very good. I praise you. But it is not perhaps a mistake. Is it not perhaps a mistake on your part not to be strict with him, not to punish him? Do you not chain him with your love? Do you not shame him daily with your goodness and patience and make it still more difficult for him? Do you not compel this arrogant, spoilt boy to live in a hut with 2 old banana eaters, to whom even rice is a dainty, whose thoughts cannot be the same as his, whose hearts are old and quiet and beat differently from his? Is he not constrained and punished by all this? What would you do? I'm just curious. What would you do if this happened to you? How would you treat this? How would you treat this boy? I feel like Siddhartha has a good heart, and he loves him, and he wants to be accommodating. And it's hard to learn this, but I feel like tough love isn't tough love. It's called having boundaries, and that for yourself, and that's hard to learn too when you're an empathetic person. But like, do what you want, but you can't break my stuff. Like, if you don't want to work, fine, but you can't just go around breaking bowls and shit. And you want to be a snot, fine, but like affecting other people by being nasty, that's somebody has to stand up to him. Siddhartha looked at the ground in perplexity. Is anyone here? Nobody's commenting. Except Andrew. What do you think I should do? He asked softly. Vasudeva said, take him into the town. Take him to his mother's house. There will still be servants there. Take him to them. Vasudeva just wants to be rid of this kid. He's like, I'm done. And if they are no longer there, take him to a teacher, not just for the sake of education, but so that he can meet other boys and girls and be in the world to which he belongs. Have you never thought about it? You can see into my heart, said Siddhartha sadly. I've often thought about it, but how will he, who is so hard-hearted, go in this world? Will he not consider himself superior? Will he not lose himself in pleasure and power? Will he not repeat all of his father's mistakes? Will he not perhaps be quite lost in samsara? The ferryman smiled and smiled again. He touched Siddhartha's arm gently and said, ask the river about it, my friend. Listen to it. Laugh about it. Do you then really think that you have committed your follies in order to spare your son them? Can you protect your son from samsara? How? Through instruction, through prayers, through exhortation. My dear friend, have you forgotten that instructive story about Siddhartha, the Brahmin's son, which you once told me here, who protected Siddhartha and Samana from samsara, from sin, greed, and folly? Could his father's piety, his teacher's exhortations, his own knowledge, his own seeking protect him? Which father, which tender could prevent him from living his own life, from soiling himself with life, from loading himself with sin, from swallowing the bitter drink himself, from finding his own path? Do you think, my dear friend, that anybody is spared this path? Perhaps your little son, because you would like to see him spared sorrow and pain and disillusionment. But if you were to die 10 times for him, you would not alter his destiny in the slightest. You mean, do you mean, Vasudeva, that Siddhartha can't protect him from everything? It's interesting how now big Siddhartha Senior, we're going to call him Siddhartha Junior, is now coming full circle and understanding where his own father was coming from. Never had Vasudeva talked so much. Siddhartha thanked him in a friendly fashion, went troubled to his hut, but could not sleep. Vasudeva had not told him anything that he had not already thought and known himself, but stronger than his knowledge was his love for the boy, his devotion, his fear of losing him. Had he ever lost his heart to anybody so completely? Had he ever loved anybody so much, so blindly, so painfully, so hopelessly, and yet so happily? Siddhartha could not take his friend's advice. He could not give up his son. He allowed the boy to command him, to be disrespectful to him. He was silent and waited. He began daily the mute battle of friendliness and patience. Vasudeva was also silent and waited, friendly, understanding, forbearing. They were both masters of patience. Once, when the boy's face reminded him of Kamala, Siddhartha suddenly remembered something she had once said to him a long time ago. "You cannot love," she said to him, and he had agreed with her. He had compared himself with a star and other people with falling leaves, and yet he had felt some reproach in her words. It was true that he had never fully lost himself in another person to such an extent as to forget himself. He had never undergone the follies of love for another person. He had never been able to do this, and had then seemed to him that this was the biggest difference between him and the ordinary people. But now, since his son was there, he, Siddhartha, had become completely like one of the people, through sorrow, through loving. He was madly in love, a fool because of love. Now he also experienced belatedly, for once in his life, the strongest and strangest passion. He suffered tremendously through it, and yet was uplifted, in some way renewed and richer. He felt indeed that this love, this blind love for his son, was a very human passion, that it was samsara, a troubled spring of deep water. At the same time, he felt it was not worthless, that it was necessary, that it came from his own nature. This emotion, this pain, these follies had also had to be experienced. In the meantime, his son let him commit his follies. Let him strive. Let him be humbled by his moods. There was nothing about his father that attracted him, and nothing that he feared. This father was a good man, a kind, gentle man, perhaps a pious man, perhaps a holy man, but all these were not qualities which could win the boy. This father, who kept him in this wretched hut, bored him, and when he answered his rudeness with a smile, every insult with friendliness, every naughtiness with kindness, that was the most hateful cunning of the old fox. The boy would have much preferred him to threaten him, to ill-treat him. A day came when young Siddhartha said what was on his mind, and openly turned against his father. The latter had told him to gather some twigs, but the boy did not leave the hut. He stood there, defiant and angry, stamped on the ground, clenched his fists, and forcibly declared his hatred and contempt in his father's face. "Bring your own twigs," he shouted, foaming. "I am not your servant. I know that you do not beat me. You dare not. I know, however, that you continually punish me and make me feel small with your piety and indulgence. You want me to become like you, so pious, so gentle, so wise. But just to spite you, I would rather become a thief and a murderer and go to hell than be like you. I hate you. You're not my father, even if you have been my mother's lover a dozen times." Full of rage and misery, he found an outlet in a stream of wild and angry words at his father. Then the boy ran away and only returned late in the evening. The following morning he had disappeared. A small two-colored basket made of bast in which the ferrymen kept the copper and silver coins which they received as their payment had also disappeared. The boat, too, had gone. Siddhartha saw on the other side of the bank. Oh my gosh. The boy had run away. Siddhartha doesn't know anything about that, does he? I must follow him, said Siddhartha, who had been in great distress since the boy's hard words of the previous day. A child cannot go through the forest alone. He will come to some harm. We must make a raft, Vasudeva, in order to cross the river. We will make a raft, said Vasudeva, in order to fetch our boat, which the boy took away. But let him go, my friend. He is not a child any more. He knows how to look after himself. He is seeking the way to the town, and he is right. Do not forget that. He is doing what you yourself have neglected to do. He is looking after himself. He is going his own way. Oh, Siddhartha, I can see you are suffering pain over which one should laugh, over which you will soon laugh yourself. Siddhartha did not reply. He already had held the hatchet in his hands and began to build a raft from bamboo, and Vasudeva helped him to bind the cane together with grass rope. Then they sailed across, were driven far out, but directed the raft upstream to the other bank. I wonder if I'm coming in at all. I had one comment. Why have you brought the hatchet with you? Asked Siddhartha. Vasudeva said, It is possible that the oar of our boat is lost. But Siddhartha knew what his friend was thinking. Probably that the boy would have thrown the oar away or broken it out of revenge and to prevent their following him. And indeed, there was no longer an oar in the boat. Vasudeva indicated the bottom of the boat and smiled at his friend as if to say, Do you not see what your son wishes to say? Do you not see that he does not wish to be followed? But he did not say it in words, and started to make a new oar. Siddhartha took leave of him to look for the boy. Vasudeva did not hinder him. Siddhartha had been in the forest a long time when the thought occurred to him that this search was useless. Either he thought the boy had long ago left the wood and reached the town, or if he were still on the way, he would hide from the pursuer. And when he reflected further, he found that he was not troubled about his son, that inwardly he knew he had neither come to any harm nor was threatened with danger in the forest. Nevertheless, he went on steadily, no longer to save him, but with a desire perhaps to see him again, and he walked up to the outskirts of the town. When he reached the wide road near the town, he stood still at the entrance to the beautiful pleasure garden that had once belonged to Kamala, where he had once seen her in a sedan chair for the first time. The past rose before his eyes. Once again, he saw himself standing there, a young, bearded, naked Samana, his hair full of dust. Siddhartha stood there a long time and looked through the open gate into the garden. He saw monks walking about under the beautiful trees. He stood there for a long time, thinking, seeing pictures, seeing the story of his life. He stood there a long time, looking at the monks, saw in their place the young Siddhartha and Kamala walking beneath the tall trees. Clearly he saw himself attended by Kamala and receiving her first kiss. He saw how he had arrogantly and contemptuously looked back on his Samana days, how he had proudly and eagerly begun his worldly life. He saw Kamaswami, the servants, the banquets, the dice players, the musicians. He saw Kamala's songbird in its cage. He lived it all over again, breathed samsara, and was again old and tired, again felt nausea and the desire to die, again heard the holy Om. After he stood for a long time at the gate to the garden, Siddhartha realized the desire had driven him to this place was foolish, that he could not help his son, that he could not force himself on him. I missed that. But that it should heal, because the wound did not heal during that hour. He was sad. In the place of the goal which had brought him here after his son, there was only emptiness. Sadly, he sat down. He felt something die in his heart. He saw no more happiness, no goal. He sat there depressed and waited. He had learned this from the river, to wait, to have patience, to listen. He sat and listened in the dusty road, listened to his heart which beat wearily and sadly and waited for a voice. He crouched there and listened for many hours, saw no more visions, sank into emptiness, and let himself sink without seeing a way out. And when he felt the wound smarting, he whispered the word Om, filled himself with Om. The monks in the garden saw him, and as he crouched there for many hours, and the dust collected on his gray hairs, one of the monks came toward him and placed 2 bananas in front of him. The old man did not see him. A hand touching his shoulder awakened him from his trance. He recognized this gentle, timid touch and recovered. He rose and greeted Vasudeva, who had followed him. When he saw Vasudeva's kind face, I'm going to start crying. I'm going to start crying right now. When he saw Vasudeva's kind face, looked at his little laughter wrinkles into his bright eyes, he smiled also. He now saw the bananas lying near him. He picked them up, gave one to the ferryman, and ate the other. Then he went silently with Vasudeva through the wood again, back to the ferry. Neither spoke of what had happened. Neither mentioned the boy's name. Neither spoke of his flight, nor of the wound. Siddhartha went to his bed in the hut, and when Vasudeva went to him after a time to offer him some coconut milk, he found him asleep. Oh, and that was that chapter. I almost don't want to stop reading. I've only been on here 27 minutes. Do I continue with the next one? Oh my gosh, if you're in here and can see me, can you comment? I have a feeling I'm not broadcasting. Is anyone here? No one's gonna comment. Oh no. Well, maybe people will watch replay then, because I really want to read this next chapter. That one was too short. This one's kind of short too, and we'll leave the last chapter for... No one's gonna comment. I'm gonna read this. I can't be... I have a feeling it'll all work out on replay. Surely somebody would like text me or let me know that they can't see me somehow, but I guess not. I have to have a little bit more closure from that last chapter. So Siddhartha has been leveled by love. He is human. He's not a robot. The wound smarted for a long time. Siddhartha took many travelers across the river who had a son or a daughter with them, and he could not see any of them without envying them, without thinking, so many possessed this great happiness. Why not I? Even wicked people, thieves and robbers have children, love them and are loved by them, except me. So childishly and illogically did he now reason. So much had he become like the ordinary people. He had now regarded people in a different light than he had previously, not very clever, not very proud, and therefore all the more warm, curious, and sympathetic. When he now took the usual kind of travelers across, businessmen, soldiers, and women, they no longer seemed alien to him as they once had. He did not understand or share their thoughts and views, but he shared with them life's urges and desires. Although he had reached a high stage of self-discipline and bore his last wound well, he now felt as if these ordinary people were his brothers. Their vanities, desires, and trivialities no longer seemed absurd to him. They had become understandable, lovable, and even worthy of respect. There was a blind love of a mother for her child. There was the blind love for a mother of her child, for her child, the blind, foolish pride of a fond father for his only son, the blind, eager strivings of a young, vain woman for ornament and the admiration of men. All these little, simple, foolish, but tremendously strong, vital, passionate urges and desires no longer seemed trivial to Siddhartha. For their sake, he saw people live and do great things, travel, conduct wars, suffer, and endure immensely, and he loved them for it. He saw life, vitality, the indestructible, and Brahman and all their desires and needs. These people were worthy of love and admiration in their blind loyalty, in their blind strength and tenacity. With the exception of one small thing, one tiny little thing, they lacked nothing that the sage and thinker had, and that was the consciousness of the unity of all life. And many a time Siddhartha even doubted whether this knowledge, this thought, was of such great value, whether it was not also perhaps the childish self-flattery of thinkers who were perhaps only thinking children. The men of the world were equal to the thinkers in every other respect and were often superior to them, just as animals in their tenacious, undeviating actions in cases of necessity may often seem superior to human beings. When within Siddhartha there slowly grew and ripened the knowledge of what wisdom really was, and the goal of his long seeking. It was nothing but preparation of the soul, a capacity, a secret art of thinking, feeling, and breathing thoughts of unity at every moment of life. This thought matured him slowly, and it was reflected in Vasudeva's old childlike face, harmony, knowledge of the eternal perfection of the world, and unity. But the wound still smarted. Siddhartha thought yearningly and bitterly about his son, nursed his love and feelings of tenderness for him, let the pain gnaw at him, underwent all the follies of love. The flame did not extinguish itself. One day, when the wound was smarting terribly, Siddhartha rowed across the river, consumed by longing, and got out of the boat with the purpose of going to the town to seek his son. The river flowed softly and gently. It was in the dry season, but its voice rang out strangely. It was laughing. It was distinctly laughing. The river was laughing clearly and merrily at the old ferryman. Siddhartha stood still. He bent over the water in order to hear better. He saw his face reflected in the quietly moving water, and there was something in this reflection that reminded him of something he had forgotten, and when he reflected on it, he remembered. His face resembled that of another person whom he had once known and loved, even feared. It resembled the face of his father, the Brahmin. He remembered now how once as a youth he had compelled his father. Kelly, good morning. How is the picture? I think I lost everybody. I'm so glad you commented. Now I know at least somebody's in here. We're getting close to the end. It resembled the face of his father, the Brahmin. He remembered how once, as a youth, he had compelled his father to let him go and join the ascetics, how he had taken leave of him, how he had gone and never returned. Had not his father also suffered the same pain that he was now suffering for his son? Had not his father died long ago, alone, without having seen his son again? Did he not expect the same fare? Was it not a comedy, a strange and stupid thing, this repetition, this course of events in a fateful circle? The river laughed. Yes, that was how it was. Everything that was not suffered to the end and finally concluded recurred, and the same sorrows were undergone. Siddhartha climbed into. This is such an interesting thing to think about. And I see it a lot, like, on social media lately, at this notion of generational trauma. Is it, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Is it generational trauma? That we all kind of, we're all, maybe that's not the right thing, but we're making the same decisions and having the same experiences that our ancestors did. This is making me think of something else, not sort of related, but not entirely. Let me finish this. How do you get out of this? How do you obtain moksha? How do you obtain liberation from this suffering? Like, obviously, his own father must have suffered, and I think he's realizing this, must have suffered just greatly whenever Siddhartha left him and didn't ever come back. Siddhartha climbed into the boat again and rowed back to the hut, thinking of his father, thinking of his son, laughed at by the river, in conflict with himself, verging on despair, and no less inclined to laugh aloud at himself and the whole world. The wound still smarted. He still rebelled against his fate. There was still no serenity in conquest of his suffering, yet he was hopeful, and when he returned to the hut, he was filled with an unconquerable desire to confess to Vasudeva, to disclose everything, to tell everything to the man who knew the art of listening. Vasudeva sat in the hut weaving a basket. He no longer worked the ferry boat. His eyes were becoming weak, also his arms and hands, but unchanged and radiant were the happiness and the serene well-being of his face. Thank you so much, Kelly. Siddhartha sat down beside the old man and slowly began to speak. He told him now what he had never mentioned before, how he had gone to the town that time, of his smarting wound, of his envy at the sight of happy fathers, of his knowledge of the folly of such feelings, of his hopeless struggle with himself. He mentioned everything. He could tell him everything, even consider the most painful things. He could disclose everything. He displayed his wound, told him of his flight that day, how he had rowed across the river with the object of wandering into the town, and how the river had laughed. As he went on speaking, and Vasudeva listened to him with a serene face, Siddhartha was more keenly aware than ever of Vasudeva's attentiveness. He felt his troubles, his anxieties, and his secret hopes flow across to him and then return again. Disclosing his wound to this listener was the same as bathing in it. Was the same as bathing in the river, until it became cool and one with the river. As soon as he went on talking and confessing, Siddhartha felt more and more that this was no longer Vasudeva, no longer a man who was listening to him. He felt that this motionless listener was absorbing his confession, as a tree absorbs the rain, that this motionless man was the river itself, that he was God himself, that he was eternity itself. As Siddhartha stopped thinking about himself and his wound, this recognition of the change in Vasudeva possessed him. And the more he realized it, the less strange did he find it. The more did he realize that everything was natural and in order, that Vasudeva had long ago almost always been like that, only he did not quite recognize it. Indeed, he himself was hardly different from him. He felt that he now regarded Vasudeva as the people regarded the gods, and that this could not last. Inwardly, hello, Lynchburg. How's the picture? How am I coming from Lynchburg? How am I coming in, Malik? Can you see me? Comments have been off. We're on the chapter of the Om. We're almost finished, and this part is a little abstract, and but really important. I feel like this is where Siddhartha becomes liberated, right? Or I think he does. When he had finished, okay, good. It's just that people left, I guess. When he had finished talking, Vasudeva directed his somewhat weakened glance at him. He did not speak, but his face silently radiated love and serenity, understanding and knowledge. He took Siddhartha's hand, led him to the seat on the riverbank, sat down beside him, and smiled at the river. You have heard it laugh, he said, but you have not heard everything. Let us listen. You will hear more. They listened. The many-voiced song of the river echoed softly. Siddhartha looked into the river and saw many pictures in the flowing water. He saw his father, lonely, mourning for his son. He saw himself lonely, also with the bonds of longing for his faraway son. He saw his son, also lonely, the boy eagerly advancing along the burning path of life's desires, each one concentrating on his goal, each one obsessed by his goal, each one suffering. The river's voice was sorrowful. It sang with yearning and sadness, flowing towards its goal. Do you hear? Asked Vasudeva's mute glance. Siddhartha nodded. Listen better, whispered Vasudeva. Siddhartha tried to listen better. The picture of his father, his own picture, and the picture of his son all flowed into each other. Kamala's picture also appeared and flowed on, and the picture of Govinda and others emerged and passed on. They all became part of the river. It was the goal of all of them, yearning, desiring, suffering, and the river's voice was full of longing, full of smarting woe, full of insatiable desire. The river flowed on towards its goal. Siddhartha saw the river hasten, made up of himself and his relatives and all the people he had ever seen. All the waves and water hastened, suffering towards goals, many goals, to the waterfall, to the sea, to the current, to the ocean, and all goals were reached, and each one was succeeded by another. The water changed to vapor and rose, became rain, and came down again, became spring, brook, and river, changed anew, flowed anew. But the yearning voice had altered. It still echoed sorrowfully, searchingly, but other voices accompanied it, voices of pleasure and sorrow, good and evil voices, laughing and lamenting voices, hundreds of voices, thousands of voices. Siddhartha listened. He was now listening intently, completely absorbed, quite empty, taking in everything. He felt that he had now completely learned the art of listening. He had often heard all this before, all these numerous voices in the river, but today they sounded different. He could no longer distinguish the different voices, the merry voice from the weeping voice, the childish voice from the manly voice. They all belonged to each other, the lament of those who yearn, the laughter of the wise, the cry of indignation, and the groan of the dying. They were all interwoven and interlocked, entwined in 1,000 ways, and all the voices, all the goals, all the yearnings, all the sorrows, all the pleasures, all the good and evil, all of them together was the world. All of them together was a stream of events, the music of life. When Siddhartha listened attentively to this river, to this song of 1,000 voices, when he did not listen to the sorrow or laughter, when he did not bind his soul to any one particular voice and absorb it in himself, but heard them all, the whole, the unity, the great song of 1,000 voices consisted of one word, Om, perfection. Do you hear? Asked Vasudeva's glance over again. Vasudeva's smile was radiant. It hovered brightly in all the wrinkles of his old face, as the Om hovered over all the voices of the river. His smile was radiant as he looked at his friend, and now the same smile appeared on Siddhartha's face. His wound was healing. His pain was dispersing. His self had merged into unity. From that hour, Siddhartha ceased to fight against his destiny. There shone in his face the serenity of knowledge, of one who is no longer confronted with conflict of desires, who had found salvation, who is in harmony with the stream of events, with the stream of life, full of sympathy and compassion, surrendering himself to the stream, belonging to the unity of all things. As Vasudeva rose from the seat on the riverbank, when he looked into Siddhartha's eyes and saw the serenity of knowledge shining in them, he touched his shoulder gently in his kind, protective way and said, I have waited for this hour, my friend. Now it has arrived. Let me go. I have been Vasudeva, the ferryman, for a long time. Now it is over. Farewell, hut. Farewell, river. Farewell, Siddhartha. I'm going to start crying. Siddhartha bowed low before the departing man. I knew it, he said softly. Are you going into the woods? Yes, I'm going into the woods. I'm going into the unity of all things, said Vasudeva, radiant. And so he went away. Siddhartha watched him. With great joy and gravity, he watched him, saw his steps full of peace, his face glowing, his form full of light. Oh my God. So that was the end of that chapter. I'm gonna start crying. So this whole time, the last chapter of the Sun, when Siddhartha was, being so patient and he's being so patient and loving with his son, and just waiting for his son to come around. um yeah. I know crying's okay, and I might still cry. um who was doing that to Siddhartha? Somebody was doing that for Siddhartha. I'm gonna start crying. His friend Vasudeva, who had listened to the river and attained enlightenment, right? We have one more chapter to go, which I will read on Friday. Friday morning, 9 a.m. If you want to finish the book out with me, that would be wonderful. Also, it makes me think, like, for some reason, I keep coming back to, like, wounding, and the analogy of, like, a physical wound, like a cut or something, um, and comparing that to a psychic wound. When something happens, when we, you know, a- and accidentally cut ourselves or something, and it starts hurting. Um, how often do you say, "Man, this should not be hurting me. Like, this shouldn't." Like, do you ever just do you ever think, this should not hurt this much? Like, this shouldn't hurt at all. I shouldn't be experiencing pain. No, you don't. You understand. You accept the wound because you know that this is part of healing, that this is the way life is, that the reason you're feeling pain, um, is because we are in this um, body filled with nerve endings that let us know something's not right. Something needs attention. Something needs to be cleaned, or looked after in some way, right? This pain. We don't, like, sit and think we shouldn't be feeling this, right? Why is it that whenever we're feeling this sadness or longing, that Siddhartha is feeling, and missing his son so bad, and um, feeling this pain of loss, why is it that we fight that so much? Or I have. Maybe you don't, but I have in my life. Just like, I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling upset. I shouldn't be feeling um this pain, and it becomes almost um like you're causing more pain to yourself because you're focused on the hurt that you're experiencing, right? And I feel like the whole ending part, um when he's listening to the river and he's hearing the sounds of everything, right? He's accepted, finally accepted the wound. He's accepted the pain. He's accepted the other side of the coin of love, which is grief. You have to, in order to love, you have to accept the possibility of grief. Um, because I guess that's, you don't have to, but in an idealistic, non-dual reality, you would accept that, it's all the same. Like, grief and pain is the same as love. It's just inverted, right? Um, good, evil. It's all a spectrum. I'm gonna go. Thank you for watching, though, and I will be back on Friday morning at 9 a.m. Chicago time. Take care.